So, greetings, villagers. First, I want to welcome you to the University of the Trees.
So, I brought some time. We were listening to the sound through those loudspeakers.
I also want to welcome you
Listening is really natural,
to the space of imagination.
to have something artificial as an interface.
The space of imagination is inside you,
About putting
inside every single person.
so I'm using
And later on today, we will do a short practice
and we will just start with it.
with this space of imagination.
Maybe you can close your eyes.
But before I go on and try and explain a little bit about the University of the Trees, I want to say a little bit about this space of imagination. It's a very wonderful space, and every single human being in the world has it. It's the space in which we all see our memories. We bring forward pictures from the past. Everybody can do it. Maybe before you're 2 years old, you don't realize that you're doing it, but we can all do it. But the space is even more amazing because as I bring my pictures from the past forward into the space, my Shelley pictures, and you can do it at the same time. No one else can see in your space, but you can see in your space. You can bring your pictures, maybe from when you're 4 or 5 years old, into the space, and then a bit later, 8 or 9, and maybe a bit later, 14 or 15, and I'm very old, so I can bring 20, 30, 40, I can go on. But you can bring these pictures of yourself into this amazing space that you carry on your shoulders, maybe somewhere around here, like a dark theater, where you can see your memories. And that's really amazing. We do it all the time, but we don't know it. But even more amazing, while you can see your pictures of 4 and 5 and 8 and 9 and 15 and 16, you can see them all next to each other. There are no walls. And you can even move them around. You can look at the 8 or 9 picture and not the 4 or 5 picture. At the same time that we're doing that, we can also see each other now. I can see your face, and I can look at you and see you and your red ribbon, and you can see me. And at the same time that we can see the past pictures, we can also see the present. And that's really amazing. I can close my eyes, and I can see you all in me. My eye is not on you, and you are not inside my head, but I've actually got you there in this amazing space of the imagination. But even more amazing, it gets better and better, I can also make pictures in this space of something that hasn't yet happened. I can make pictures of the future. I can imagine a tree without leaves, and in a few months' time, I can imagine how that tree will look when it's got leaves on. But you can say that's not a real future picture of something that hasn't happened, because I know it from last year. It's a projection onto the future. But I can actually imagine things that have never yet happened before. And now we're all together in this space of imagination, but it's your own. But we're sitting here collectively in our imaginative space. Really amazing. I don't know how many hundred people, but one can almost feel it. You're not just listening to me, you're in your own space and hearing me at the same time. Really amazing. So I can imagine a picture of the future, a really terrifying picture. I can imagine this beautiful planet, this ball that we live on. I can imagine this planet covered with asphalt, with tarmac, every single millimeter. really terrifying picture. And you can say, what a ridiculous picture, that will never happen. You will be the last person to put the last bit on, there'll be no food. Yeah, it's a ridiculous picture and we hope it will never happen. But it means we can also imagine other future pictures. We could imagine different ways of living together. We could imagine in this wonderful space, before we even share it with another person, we could imagine other ways of living together, other ways of bringing up children, not living in little boxes, 2 parents, 2 children, 1 child all fighting with each other. We could imagine different possibilities in this space and share them with each other. So that is something truly amazing, a capacity that we all have. We don't even know we're doing it. We're doing it all the time. We're looking and seeing, taking images in. There's no other reality except what goes in this space. But the most amazing thing, and this is really about our freedom and about social sculpture, which is what I do. Social sculpture is working with the invisible materials of thinking, speech, discussion, not just wood and clay. But the most amazing thing is there's a 4th part of this space, this imaginative space. And that is, I can stand a little bit to the side and I can look at how I see. I can look at how I look at my childhood, at the present, at the future. In other words, I can see the lenses with which I see the world. And that means I can see my values. I can see my attitudes. I can see my habits of thought. And if I don't like what I see, I can change it. So I've got a lot of freedom in this space of imagination. So that is an introduction to this wonderful space we are sitting here with. And I have to run through my slides very quickly because I've used up a lot of time to tell you about, to introduce this space. So this is an image of a village assembly in Egypt, in a place called Shechem. And the people gather together to meet. We're in an assembly now. We have to discover what kind of assembly is this? What kind of thinking can we do? Or what kind of perceiving, what kind of imagining can we do in this assembly? And also, you might wonder, what has this got to do with University of the Trees? So this diagram in the middle is really interesting because the arrows go out and they come in. And in every single gathering of any kind, from the old days or new, people come into a gathering. This is a gathering, a much more intimate gathering, a smaller group of people in a village. Another kind of gathering, not so intimate. But in every kind of gathering, this is a festival, a religious festival, where there's perhaps not so much space for the individual. In every kind of gathering, each human being comes with this wonderful dome, this theater of the imagination. If there's someone standing up like that, perhaps there's not so much space for your own imagination, because the person has a very strong message, and perhaps you have to obey that message. So there are many different kinds of gatherings. Perhaps in a gathering where there is a strong impulse, a particular focus, there's maybe also not so much space. And now we're in our global village where we're all connected. But in this village, sometimes we're also isolated and fragmented. And we're looking for a place to put our chair. But we have got wonderful new communities in this global village. New kinds of assemblies. A vase is one of them. I'm sure you mostly all know about a vase. Isn't it amazing to think that 40 million people, 40 million, that's a lot, 40 million people in the world are members of a vase. And within days, a vase can get millions of those people to sign something, to agree to something, and they can take that message to a government, to a group of people, like they did in Brazil. And they can sometimes get laws changed or laws stopped. Isn't that amazing? But a vase can't do everything. And so sometimes people have to go out into the streets. They have to assemble in a different kind of way. And this is an assembly I think some of you are very familiar with. It's very recent. The yellow umbrellas, who are very powerful and valuable, but maybe there are questions too about what kind of space there is for the individual participant in this kind of assembly. These are all different kinds of assemblies. And this is another picture of Occupy in London, where hundreds, thousands of people came together for many days on the streets. So there are many different kinds of assemblies where we each bring ourself, in other words, our imagination, our space of reflection. What I described to you, the seeing what we see, is a kind of reflection where we can look at the world, we can imagine things about the future, we know what's happened in the past, and we can work in this amazing workspace. Sometimes I describe this space as the only rent-free. We don't have to pay rent for it. It's given free. The only rent-free workspace. It's our studio that we have. So, this is the University of the Trees workspace. And what kind of assembly place is this? In this university, which is the oldest university on Earth, it exists all over and everywhere on Earth, wherever human beings are prepared to look at how we live in the world. How do we live on this beautiful planet? Is it right that we have things like profit? Can we buy and sell parts of the planet? The University of the Trees is not an eco-project that's just about planting trees. We could plant trees if that's what people in an area decide. But it's first of all a university that asks the question, what is knowledge? Not we tell you what to know. What is knowledge? How do we know? And what do we need to know to shape a humane and ecological world? And above all, most of all, it's a university where in the trees or on the pavement or in our houses, in our schools, in our official universities, we can start to look at how do we live in this world? With what values? With what attitudes? What are my attitudes toward all the other life forms? With what attitudes do I live in this world? So the University of the Trees uses these yellow bands that I showed you. These yellow bands go around a tree, not just putting them on a tree to mark them. These yellow bands honor a tree. They acknowledge that a tree is a really huge being. And on a very inner level, you could say, I think the trees are waiting for the human beings to wake up, to come to them. But we use these yellow bands to create what we call a field of awareness, a temporary workspace where in a city, if I'm working with a group of people or a group of people are gathering, like in one city in Germany, there are many organizations working, Transition Towns, Edible City. There are a number of organizations. The organizations will create this temporary workspace. This is in Kassel, outside the big exhibition called the Documenta. And the organizations will make these bands on the trees just to acknowledge that wherever we are on the planet is a place to come to consciousness, is a place to come to our senses. And in Kassel, they are meeting to look at each person's agenda, and then to look at the agenda of the community, to look at the agenda of the city, to look at the agenda of the region, and to try together to create a multi-dimensional agenda where each individual person's agenda is also still alive, where you are not suddenly part of a movement or an organization and your own agenda is kind of blurred out. So it's takes many days, this process, but it's very worthwhile, and I hope I've explained it well enough so quickly. So one of the things we say in the University of the Trees is that a tree knows how to be a tree. If you think of a tree, a seed is planted or flies in the wind. That seed, when it grows, will become a ginkgo tree, or it will become an oak tree. It doesn't lose its way. It knows how to be a tree. The difference with a human being, so the University of the Trees is also interested in the differences, although we might all be one, on one level, all life forms. A tree knows how to be a tree, but the difference with human beings is that when we're born, if you just leave us alone, we won't simply unfold and become truly human. And the reason for this is that human beings have got creativity, they've got freedom. We are not fixed to our instincts or fixed to a pattern like a tree is. And that means that we can make wonderful things, but we can also make disasters. We've got the ability to make mistakes, the most terrible mistakes. You only look at Fukushima and you can see one big glaring mistake in our eyes. Nuclear power, perhaps as a whole, is one giant mistake. There are many mistakes that we make with our wonderful freedom and creativity, with our intelligence that trees don't make. And some people get very cynical and they say, look at human beings, they're a real disaster. They only make nightmares in the world. But actually, you can also look at this, and this is what University of the Trees really thinks and believes. You can say that is a cause for great hope. All the other of Earth's creatures know what to be, how to be what they are. A little worm becomes a worm, and a fish becomes a fish, and they all know how to do it. Only human beings is the most dangerous of all Earth's creatures, can go wrong. And that actually is cause for great hope, that human beings are just at the beginning of our development. And so that sentence there, we are the revolution or the evolution, actually is part of that idea that it's human beings who will make the huge change. But one of the main ideas in the work I do and in the University of the Trees is that creativity is our real capital. And in the words of Joseph Beuys, who developed the social sculpture ideas, he said art equals capital. He also said that social sculpture, last night we heard Rick Lowe talk, and he spoke about social sculpture as the idea that we can all shape and mold not only materials, but our own lives, and that's true. But Joseph Beuys also said social sculpture is about free, democratic socialism. And maybe that's a hard thing to think about. We normally think about socialism now, after the fall of many communist countries, as something very negative. But maybe real socialism has not yet happened. Maybe socialism means something that's connected to freedom and that's truly democratic. And the socialism part is how we learn to live together socially in association. So in the field of social sculpture, just to give you a few more things very quickly, in the field of social sculpture, there is not only the University of the Trees as an arena where we can work with what we think and our values and attitudes. There are also other groups like the Omnibus for Direct Democracy. They're called Democracy in Motion, and they've been traveling around Europe, and they stop in every town and every village, and they speak with people about what democracy actually means. We all think maybe we want democracy, but actually there are many kinds of democracy, and what does it mean? Another group that's linked to the social sculpture ideas, because the social sculpture ideas are not just about making social artworks or artworks with a social meaning. They're actually, the idea in social sculpture is about how we can shape social, economic, political forms that allow every human being to be this creative artist, to be this creative being. And one of the key ideas that's going around Europe, and the idea is that if human beings are really going to develop their capacities, these creative gifts that we've got, that make us dangerous if we don't develop them, that make us something amazing, we could develop new social forms. We could develop a society as real agents of change. We could develop a society where people aren't starving, where no one's unemployed, where people can start to find their gifts, where we can have assemblies and meet and say, what is the work we need to do? How do we need to live? Do we need to buy and sell things? Do we need to make profits so that some people get rich and some people are starving? And that doesn't mean straight away we have to think of old forms of communism. So unconditional basic income goes together with direct democracy, goes together with a university of the trees that says we need to learn to look at how we live in this world, how we live with all the other life forms and beings, and how we live together with each other. So, dialogue as a connective practice is a key idea. This is the University of the Trees in Berlin, where we make an acupuncture action once a year. There are 7 trees in the center of Berlin that carry these bands, and all the different groups in Berlin know that they are in another kind of university. When we put a band around a tree, it's a bit like a marriage. It's a bit like making a commitment to the world, to this beautiful world that we're all born in for free. Making a commitment to the world that we will never look away. Arundhati Roy, the writer from India, writes in her book that the one thing we can do, like the Bodhisattva vow, is as long as there's one suffering being, to not look away. So University of the Trees is also like a university in the sense it's got different modules, it's got practices, has symposia and fora, but everything in a little bit of a different way. And Earth Forum is one of the modules in University of the Trees. This is all part of Earth Forum. Earth Forum was developed in 2011 for the Climate Summit in South Africa. I was invited to develop a practice or a process that could be used in communities, that could be used with planners, teachers, also with decision makers in the run-up to the summit, during the summit, and after the summit. And in 2011, Earth Forum went with a group of people that I trained, so everybody can become an Earth Forum guide, because everybody can get trained. That's the idea. So it's an assembly process where only 10 or 12 people can take part, and you could say, well, that's ridiculous. We need to reach millions of people, but because it can spread with multipliers, and everybody can get a cloth, works with a little oiled cloth, and later on today we'll be doing it. People went on this train through South Africa to 17 or 18 towns and worked with farmers and farm workers and decision makers and city councils and people in NGOs and school pupils doing this process, which I haven't got time to explain now. I'm going to quickly jump past these, but to say that this is another practice in University of the Trees. It's a deer skin stretched on a frame, that makes a place for dialogue, and through the hole in the deerskin, so we never lose sight of this world that we're busy crucifying, we have discussions. You'll see on the pavement there was a sign about, this is the mobile university, and between 12:30 and 2:30 is a discussion about freedom. And we talk about what does freedom mean on the pavements, in the official universities, etc. So we drag this, it's on wheels, and we can move the deerskin around the city. These are all different things that the University of the Trees does. Sometimes we participate with groups of people in actions. This was an action to save trees in a city. And one of the other things we do is we've formed a group called the Anti-Capitalist Practice Group, but it also is about exploring capital. And we're busy making a workbook that people can all contribute to look at what is this huge spectrum of things. Maybe somebody who teaches Tai Chi is really contributing to an anti-capitalist world because they've got a different idea of a human being. They don't think about a human being as a machine. And that's part of the new anti-capitalist future. This is a project called Agents of Change, which is a climate crisis project, and it's working in about 6 different cities around the world, where people come together and explore their fears about the rising waters and what their community might do about them. So I think I'm going to stop on this slide and leave it up here while we do our practice. I love this image because it's got a secret inside it. And if we had time today, we would make this big shape and we would walk it. But the wonderful secret in the shape is that inner and outer are connected. And the reason that's so important in the field of social sculpture is because normally we think about action as the outside world and thought as separate from action, thought in the inside world. And thought isn't practical. That's what we normally think. But in the field of social sculpture, we think that thought and action, you can see it in this previous slide, thought and action are actually part of one spectrum. When we think, a movement begins, and that movement carries out into action. One of the amazing people in the world, Bertolt Brecht, who was a playwright, said, if we're going to mobilize people, the mobilization has to begin inside. The movement, the will to act, begins inside with an intention. So thought and action, what happens in this wonderful imaginative space is not separate from the world of action. We have to carry it out, but it's part of one spectrum. And so we are very responsible. We are also free to shape our thoughts, but we are very responsible because how we think is how we live. The forms we see in the world around us are a picture of our thoughts. I want to just end with this beautiful image that I love very much. It was made by the teacher of my teacher. So Joseph Beuys was my teacher, the artist. This is a blackboard drawing by Rudolf Steiner, nearly 100 years old. And it's a drawing where he was explaining that the light is so fine, it can't get into the dense material of the earth unless it goes through the green. And the beautiful green coat that is around the earth, the green mantle, is that part of life that transfers the sunlight into food, that transfers the sunlight into something that can get into this dense material of the earth. And just like that happens with the sunlight, trees and plants transform the sunlight into the green into the nourishment for everything. Everything is based on the green nourishment. Just like that happens, human beings transform the difficulties, transform the givens into new possibilities. Human beings take the light also from the cosmos. We bring it into this wonderful space, our consciousness, which is not just our brain, probably includes our heart, our consciousness, maybe our hearts think too. And we bring all what we see, all the difficulties, all the possibilities, we bring it in and we can transform it. So the trees and the plants are busy doing one job, and they do their job really well if we don't interfere with it. And we need to do our job. We're all agents of change. We can all transform the difficulties into another kind of wonderful thing, into a humane and ecologically just future. So thank you very much.